What's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about Soulbinds and Conduits heading into patch 9.1. Now, if you guys have watched the Demonology Affliction guides that I put out last week, I have mentioned that I do still feel that Night Fae is the best covenant if you're trying to min-max things heading into 9.1 Sanctum Domination in Season 2. Once again, if you're not trying to, or if you're a Necrolord or a Venthyr or a Kyrian, that's great. That's totally fine. You can do what you want. For the most part, the conduits we talk about here should pretty much translate over the same due to every new Soulbind getting a potency conduit right at renown 41, 42, or 43. If we do mention a covenant based one for Night Fae, Soul Eater, there are options with other covenants too, and other options I'll give here as well. But I wanted to make this video briefly, I know brief for me is tough, to address the concerns, the questions, the issues, whatever about what Soulbinds for what spec and what conduits and what plan I have going into 9.1. Now, I have spoken with THE about this a little bit as well, and he has similar thoughts, some that vary a tiny bit, but either way, a lot of it's just sort of speculative now because we don't really know if Aff's gonna get buffed, if Demo or Destro get nerfed or buffed. We don't really know. And the good thing is that if you make these changes now, heading the week of the patch dropping before Heroic opens, you should be set on Conduit energy and Soulbinds and everything before, well, the raid actually opens. So with that being said, let's get into it. So before we get into talking about the exact Soulbinds and Conduits, we should briefly talk about some of the buffs and nerfs that they received a couple days ago. So Pelagos' mastery was reduced by 10% through combat meditation. We already know that every Soulbind's getting a new potency conduit, basically week 1 of the patch dropping, which is cool. The relevant changes: Pelagos, his mastery reduced by a certain point. A many random fear duration, not a big deal. Forgeborn Reveries now applies soul exhaustion. It's sort of like you can't cheat death essentially twice in a row for a certain allotted amount of time. Now, as far as Night Fae is concerned, Nia's Tools Burrs, the damage has been reduced by 8%. So 8% sounds like it might be a decent bit, but the fact of the matter is that Burrs' overall breakdown of your damage percent is roughly anywhere from like 2.5% to 5 on the higher end, maybe 6 if you get good RNG. But keep in mind, Burrs is RNG, and it's better, in my opinion, on stationary fights because it is a ground-placed effect. So an 8% nerf for that it's not going to knock it from being 5% of your damage to 1%. It's actually not that big. Burrs is still a decent option if you're playing a spec that only has 2 relevant conduits, like, you know, Aff and, well, Destro. Dreamweaver, this is actually a big one. Field of Blossoms, duration increased by 20% and haste increased by 15%, was 12%. This is actually really big because, spoilers ahead, you want to play Dreamweaver for Destro for relevant fights and Sanctum Domination. So Destro is already good this tier. Dreamweaver, already good for Destro this tier. Now it's even better. Now Destro is even better, which is great. As far as Korayn is concerned, Hold the Line was changed for PvP. Not the end of the world. It is worth mentioning that Theatar had a mastery buff to Soothing Shade, which might propel him over Nagia this tier, depending on what happens with Venthyr, Soulbinds, and those things. Draven's still a disaster. Nobody plays him, but he just tanks things. So, with that being said, let's get into the Soulbinds and Conduit discussion. Now, please forego the terrible UI here. I've had to copy 10 characters to PTR because Soulbind Conduit energy is still a thing. With that being said, so my plan for Soulbinds heading into 9.1. Nia, Demonology, Dreamweaver Destruction, Korayn Affliction. Now, I'll explain that briefly and then go into the conduit choices here. Nia is your best Demo Soulbind by a pretty substantial margin due to Grove Invigoration. We will not have access to Bonded Hearts until I believe Renown 55 or so, but we do get access to our third potency conduit week 1, just like every other Soulbind. Grove Invigoration, the stamina scaling, the mastery effect, basically just everything that it does, how well it works with Wilfrids, is exceptionally strong for Demonology and makes Nia the best choice here. If you're trying to min-max in the raid, you're probably going to play Demonology on the Terragru, on Guardian the first ones, maybe on like Ner'zhul, depending on how that fight shakes out, and maybe 1 or 2 other places, most likely just Terragru and Guardian. But the option is still there to play them on those fights, and I feel, honestly, if you set your Soulbinds and Conduits now, heading into the actual raid week, you should be in a fine spot to min-max playing these. Now, Nia is better than Dreamweaver in pure single target for Destro, but once again, if you're looking to play both specs and min-max, you know, Demo does better single target than Destro. And if all you're playing is Destro the whole raid because you only play 1 spec, then make them all Destro and everything's right in the world. Dreamweaver, once again, is my choice for Destro at this current point in time. 3 potencies. You have the option of playing a conduit here or swapping the social butterfly for a You know, if you're playing Duplicitous Havoc here, for example, and you're playing it on a single target fight, or a fight where you really don't want this effect, you can swap the Butterfly here. It's not like the best trait in the world, but it's still fine. And once again, you have Field of Blossoms, which is strong and also not changed on PTR yet. It is very, very strong in 2 target. You go Soul Rot, Havoc Window, Field, and just crank things down. Cinders, Backdraft stacks. Dreamweaver looks really solid for Destro in basically every setting that's relevant, and Sanctum. And finally, Korayn. Now, we mentioned Korayn Aff. Affliction's in a weird spot, as we know. Now, once again, Aff could get buffed. Half my money is on just us playing Aff on every fight this tier when they see how bad it is coming out of Heroic Week, but that's a bit of a meme in itself. Either way, so, and for what it's worth, I don't think Aff is actually as bad as, you know, the sky is falling, everybody thinks it is. Is it the worst of all 3 specs? Yes. So with that being said, I do think I'm just going to play Korayn or have her set for Affliction in the off chance that we play Affliction on 1 to 2 fights. Once again, similar to Social Butterfly and even Burrs here, you have First Strike that you can play over, let's say, a Potency Conduit that you don't want to play in every setting here. So you can make that swap. Now, we're going to talk about the 2 Soulbind slots, or the 2 Potency slots, I'm sorry. 1 being here and 2 being here, depending what you want to set for each Soulbind heading in the 9.1. Keep in mind, the 3rd slot here will not unlock until the patch comes out, but if you slot them in day 1, day 2 of the patch, you still should have all your energy reset before the week rolls over and the raid comes out. Okay, as mentioned, starting off with Nia for Demonology. I've already set my first Soulbind or Conduit here. It's Born of Blood. Born of Blood is your Focus Malignancy. It is your Ashen Remains. I guess Focus isn't that very good or as good anymore, but it is the Conduit that is universally good for the spec. You set it and you don't forget it. Having Hand of Gul'dan give you a 25% chance to give you a stack of Demonic Core is actually really insane. It feels like Blizzard just missed nerfing this Conduit, but hey, it's fine. It's not one that's incredibly flashy, but it really just smooths the spec out and makes it better to play in basically every setting, which makes it a great choice as far as your first Potency Conduit is concerned. Moving on to a second option here. So you have the option of playing Burrs or playing this row here for potencies. And it didn't actually bug out. I thought it did. So my second choice here going into the patch week and probably going into when the raid opens is going to be Fel Commando. I think Fel Commando is, if you're playing Demonic Strength, you want to play Fel Commando. If you're playing Dreadlash, then Carnivorous Stalkers gains a lot of value. But it's the sort of give and take there. And I do feel that Demonic Strength is a little better than Dreadlash Carnivorous in the raid currently. Now keep in mind, this slot is indeed tied to a potent, like a Burrs, a non-potency DPS trait. So technically what you could do, you could have this set going into the raid week. And then when you get your 3rd slot here, you could instead go Tyrant Soul here and Fel Commando here. I do feel at this point, the Tyrant Soul is going to be your 3rd best option, potency conduit wise, on top of either Fel Commando or Carnivorous, depending what talent you're playing. But the thing with Tyrant Soul is that it is a tiny bit dependent on fight duration. Even if you're playing Wilfrid's, because if the fight dies, you know, right before your Tyrant comes off cooldown, you're not getting as much value out of this as you do if the fight dies after your Tyrant. And if that's the case, it might be worth making the swap to Burrs, because in Sims and things we've seen, Tyrant Soul is only about 30-ish DPS ahead of Burrs, and there's a lot of RNG associated with that. So initially going in the next week, basically like when the week launches, still doing Castle Nathria stuff, I want to have this. I want to have Born of Blood with Fel Commando slotted right here with the option to change the Burrs if need be. And then when the raid comes out, you can throw in Tyrant Soul and you can put it here. I would say putting it here, putting Tyrant Soul, such a nightmare. Putting Tyrant Soul like here with Fel Commando here is probably a bit of a better play if you're trying to min-max things. But either way, having these 3, I would say probably in any combination is, well, it's where you want to be. I feel currently for Demonology. Moving on to Dreamweaver, which I think is going to be our destruction like Soulbind of the tier. Similar to Born of Blood, you have Ashen Remains as your set it and forget it go-to conduit. It's good in basically every setting because every mob of relevancy is going to have Immolate rolling on it as long as it lives long enough. Chaos Bolt and Incinerate are your main spells. Incinerate, Roaring Blaze effectiveness. Chaos Bolt, big nuke. So Ashen Remains, your #1 conduit, it's never really going to change. Set it and forget it. Second slot here, I'm going to say Duplicitous Havoc. Now, like we mentioned, there are certain spots where Duplicitous Havoc is very good, and sometimes it's very bad. If it's single target, it is a completely dead conduit. It is not very good. But if you're looking to min-max heading into Sanctum, you're not going to be playing Destro in single target. You can, and it's fine. But if you're looking to play it on most other fights, where I think like it's roughly 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10 fights have some form of potential Destro Cleave on it. Some are better than others. You're probably going to be playing Duplicitous Havoc a pretty good portion of the time. But let's say you don't want to. Well, just play Social Butterfly. It's fine too. When at least 2 allies are within 8 yards, your verse is increased by 3 for 5 seconds. When this expires, 2 nearby allies gain 33% of its effect for 5 seconds before passing it to you. So it's a versatility increase. It might not be massive, but once again, this is relevant in single target and, you know, not completely dead like Duplicitous Havoc is. But if you're looking to min-max relevancy as far as Soulbinds are concerned in 9.1 and Sanctum, I do think you want to go Ashen into Duplicitous Havoc here. You also have Field of Blossoms, and this is your final ability as far as 9.0 is concerned. Once 9.1 opens up, you'll have access to this, which is your 3rd potency slot. This should unlock week 1. I believe this is 43 renown for Dreamweaver, but we're getting 3 a week from the campaign, from the 20 souls, and from artifact, what's it called? Anima power, whatever it's called. There's so many currencies nowadays. Those 3 should indeed be in place as long as everything goes according to plan. So with that being said, my 3rd choice here, honestly, is probably just going to be Soul Eater. Now, you can make a case for Infernal Brand. The thing is, Infernal Brand is, you want consistency when it comes to progression and basically every kind of, I guess, progression setting you're in. Infernal Brand is consistent. It is consistently mediocre. It is not very good when it comes to pure single target playing Roaring Blaze. It does gain value with Reign of Chaos. What is Reign of Chaos? Reign of Chaos is RNG. Soul Rot is already a strong hitting dot, and Soul Eater makes it 40% harder. Probably a little harder hitting when you get a higher rank of this Conduit too before you go into the raid. Now, if it's a 2 target fight where things are spread a bit, okay, Soul Eater might not necessarily get as much value, but I honestly still think it's probably relatively close to what Infernal Brand can do in single target or 2 target playing Roaring Blaze if the targets are spread, because if they're spread similar to, you know, Soul Rot, you're not going to get your Immolation Aura Cleave onto them, and you're going to get the same shard gen, everything else regardless, because your Infernal is down. So my choice at this point, Ashen remains into Duplicitous Havoc, and the 3rd slot here most likely being Soul Eater. Now, you could make a case for other conduits here, but I think this is personally where I'm going to go. It's universally acceptable, it's universally good, doesn't lose value like Infernal Brand does if you're playing Roaring Blaze versus Reign of Chaos, and is not just terrible like Combusting Engine is, I feel, and completely counterintuitive to what Roaring Blaze actually is as a whole. And finally, we have Korayn. Korayn, as weird as this is to say, is probably going to be your best Affliction Soulbind this tier, partially just because she's the last one you have left and you're trying to cover all 3 specs as a triple DPS spec class. But also, Affliction's damage profile has changed from being a large single target powerhouse to being more council spread based cleave, which she's not the best at making use of, but if there are frequent ad spawns like there are on Kel'Thuzad, you can still take decent advantage of Wild Hunt tactics, of First Strike, and even triggering her later ability later on in the tier, Wild Hunt Stratagem. So she has more relevancy, I would say, this tier heading into Sanctum as Affliction than she did in Castle Nathria. Now, as far as Soulbinds go, or Conduits go, I'm sorry, the first one here, like, this is an interesting debate, because once again, Affliction's pretty good in council-based fights, right? It's not like the single target powerhouse that it is in 9.0. You're going to play Destro over it, I feel, in single target, and you're certainly playing Demonology over it in single target. And even if you play AF in pure single target, you're playing Malefic Wrath, which feels terrible, and it's just a nightmare. Unless AF gets buffed, it's just not really where I would want to be personally. So, Focus Malignancy has been nerfed a tremendous amount. It's been nerfed by about 55%, I believe. It used to be like 26 or so, now it's 11. So, as far as your first like universal set it and forget it conduit goes, Focus Malignancy has fallen pretty far. I'm leaning, taking that and what Affliction is good at into consideration, I'm leaning more towards playing Rolling Agony. I can't swap here apparently, I don't know why. Oh, I'm leaning more towards playing Rolling Agony in that actual spot, because Rolling Agony is just universally acceptable. It's good in, I mean, it's good in Mythic Plus. It's fine in single target if you're playing it, but it's good in council-based fights. It gives you a huge increase to your Agony duration. It allows you to fill with more Drain Souls, more Shadow Bolts, more whatever you need, and it does indeed also Pandemic. Now, as far as your second slot is concerned here, you also have access to Wild Hunt tactic. I'm sorry, First Strike, or you can go potency here instead of first strike. Now, first strike says damaging enemy before they damage you increases your crit chance by 25% for 5 seconds. So this trait is more something you'd want to see in like a Mythic Plus setting or on a fight where there are a lot of ads spawning. We just talked about Kel'Thuzon being potentially good for Affliction if they fix the fight and ads actually die and don't just like fall over and not trigger death effects. Regardless though, there are a lot of ads spawning on Kel'Thuzon. So for example, first strike could be a lot better on that fight than it is, you know, on a pure single target fight. So the question here is, what do you slot in the second potency slot? Now you could play Withering Bolt, the conduit that replaced Cold Embrace. You can play Focused Malignancy, which has universal relevancy because you're always going to have a UA rolling on some target. Or you can play Soul Eater. Now you have Corrupting Leer, but honestly, Leer is just in a weird spot this tier. I don't really know what they're going to do with it. It seemed like they should have just overhauled it and just forgot or didn't have time. So your three options are Soul Eater, Malignancy, and Withering Bolt. But I feel personally here, after talking to a few people as well, that Malignancy is probably going to be your bet. And if you're playing AF in a single target-esque setting, or more so somewhere where you can't proc first strike, you're probably going to want to go this route. Having rolling here, having focused here, and then in your final slot, if you're going pure single target, I mean, Withering Bolt is a fine option, right? Because it's pure single target based. Or if you're going into a fight where you have maybe some potential Soul Eater Ag Cleave or Soul Rot Ag Cleave, then Soul Eater is a solid option here too. It actually sims relatively close to Withering Bolt depending on the build you're playing, and very close to Focused Malignancy as well. That's sort of because the conduits just suck, and also because Soul Eater is pretty good pound for pound compared to basically every other, you know, Covenant's conduit. Golly, there are so many systems in Shadowlands. But either way, I think this is probably going to be the optimal configuration if you're playing Korayn for AF. This could change, and there's some debate you can make here. You can make a debate for Soul Eater, but once again, I mean, there's sort of an overlap here of like, okay, multi-target, and you want to try and balance that out with like, okay, well, what can I put that's sort of opposite of this so I can play it in both settings if you want to. But once again, it's hard to make that call because Affliction, council based stuff, but I do think you want Focused Malignancy somewhere because it's just universally relevant in basically every spot. Now, if you were set on playing Withering Bolt, you could just put Bolt here and then put Malignancy here when you get your third slot open, and that'd be fine because this has probably not as much relevancy in an AoE based fight as Malignancy does. But either way, there's cases they made for both here. This is probably where I'm going to go and start with, and then decide on Withering versus Soul Eater, because once again, Withering is a fine single target conduit, but I'm not playing AF in single target. I'm playing it in council fights if they even get to play in the first place, where Soul Eater is probably a little stronger. This is not even really taking Mythic Plus into consideration, just in general. So it's awkward with AF and Korayn, but honestly, this tier, she has more added relevancy for playing Affliction, I feel, than she did last tier, with AF being a single target powerhouse. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this video gave you all a better understanding, I guess, just of my thought process and what I'm thinking is going to be, I guess, good. I don't want to say optimal, but a solid choice come 9.1 as far as conduits, soulbinds, and I guess even covenants are concerned. Now, a lot of things can change between now and 9.1's release, and even more can change going into Heroic Week, and even more going into Mythic Week once Heroic tuning is done. So it's very important to take this all with a grain of salt and keep all of that in mind, because we've seen tiers where specs look really good and they get nerfed after Heroic Week, and certain specs that are bad get buffed. Look at AF and Nighthold. I think that was roughly what happened, and look back at on EP Demo in Battle of the Zara lore. So things can definitely change. In 2 weeks, we could be saying play AF in every fight because they buffed it and they don't know how to tune it, and it's incredible, which I don't blame them, because tuning AF is a nightmare now. That's just the monster that they built. Regardless, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section below. I will be sure to get back to you. Any weak ORS profiles or add-ons you see here, you can grab free off my Twitch. If you want to swing by, hang out, ask any questions anytime, feel free to do so. I want to give a huge shout out to my patrons. Thank you guys so much for support. I really, truly do appreciate it. If you're interested in looking at potentially supporting, there should be a link somewhere up here, somewhere, give or take, if you're interested in looking at that. With all that being said, thank you all so much for hanging out today. Hopefully the video helps you out, and I'll catch you all again soon on stream. Peace.